The Sacramento Kings have their new GM just probably less than 12 hours after Monte McNair was fired, which was less than 30 minutes after the Kings were eliminated from the postseason. The Kings have now hired Scott Perry as their new GM. And by all accounts, this is a great move, right? Scott Perry, a well-respected guy, a guy who was part of the Kings organization for a little bit in 2017. Everyone seems to love him. That's great. It gives me a little bit of hope as a Kings fan. But that's the thing, as a Kings fan, for some reason, I'll just always have that hope when there's a new GM, a new coach, a new player. And maybe Scott Perry is a great basketball mind that could turn this team around. But that's not going to happen if Vivek Ranadive keeps meddling with this team. If Scott Perry is allowed to be the guy that makes all the basketball decisions, if he's allowed to do what he wants to do with this team, great. If he's allowed to go through a rebuild and really try to build this team into a competitive basketball team, then I'll have hope. But there's just no way that we can believe that that's what's going to happen, because every single time Vivek gets involved, right? Vivek meddles. It's like he wants to build a team that is the Warriors, which is kind of funny because the Warriors have always had great defenses, but he just sees the offensive side, right? He wants a number one offense. He wants to really cut corners to compete. And so Monte McNair's gone. How will we look back at his tenure as Kings GM? I don't know. I have no clue if Monte McNair is a good GM or not. I mean, how can we tell if he didn't want to really sign DeRozan, and that was Vivek, because that's the rumor. If he didn't want to fire Mike Brown, if he didn't want to trade for Zach LaVine, what did he want to do? What part of this team was his? And so it's like there's no way to really judge Monte McNair, because he came in and he made his big move. He drafted Halliburton. He traded him for Sabonis. He built the number one offense in the NBA. He built a team that was able to get the 3 seed in the West. And then that team underperformed the next year. But everyone expected them to underperform the next year. And by underperform, I mean perform as a team that wasn't top 3 in the West anymore. No one expected them to continue to be a top 3 team in the West when they didn't make any moves. So was it Monte McNair that didn't make any moves? Was it Monte McNair that decided that was the right thing to do? And then did the Kings ownership panic and say, "Oh my gosh, we're not a top 3 team. We're not a top offense anymore. Panic, get DeRozan, and when that doesn't immediately fix everything, fire Mike Brown. Fox is traded for LaVine because we want to keep competing and we want to keep trying to be a great offensive team." And so there's just no way to really evaluate how Monte McNair did as GM of the Kings, because it just seems like being the GM of the Kings is the hardest job in the NBA. And then add on top of that the little interesting dynamic of the Kings front office, where Monte McNair's the figurehead, he's the GM, but then you have Wes Wilcox there as the assistant GM, who apparently is doing all the wheeling and dealing. He's the guy making all the trades. And so I'm like, okay, Wes Wilcox was making the trades. How much decision-making power did he have? It just seems like Monte McNair's power as GM, every time we would hear something new, his power was just dwindling. And so it makes sense why it didn't even come out that he was fired. They mutually agreed to part ways. Yeah, Monte McNair probably doesn't want to be here. He's tarnishing his reputation as a GM for moves that he didn't even approve of. And I'm not saying that Monte McNair definitely is a good GM, because he was apparently the draft guy. And I mean, we didn't do great in the draft. He drafted Halliburton, he drafted Keegan Murray, but then he also just, kept drafting point guards. So it's not like Monte McNair is absolved of all blame. It's just I don't know how to judge him. And so now you have Scott Perry coming in. And again, by all accounts, great basketball mind, great hire. But it's like, how am I supposed to believe in him if he's not going to really be handed the keys to the organization? If this team truly wants to be successful, then Vivek needs to hire a great basketball mind and give them all the power. But instead, you have ownership who is seemingly super impatient. And Vivek, who seems to just have these ideas about basketball, even though he's not a basketball mind. And he's not the only owner in sports that does this. Definitely not the only owner. I think we've seen a trend in sports lately where owners aren't patient anymore. Maybe they never was. Maybe this was always a thing, but it just seems like coaches get fired left and right constantly, and you're trying to cut corners, you're trying to skip steps, and that's just not how you're going to be successful in the NBA. To some extent, the Sabonis trade was even skipping steps, but it kind of worked out. But the Kings have never truly committed to that rebuild and then let the process completely play out. And instead, you have one season where you take a step back and now you completely panic. In the NBA, the way to rebuild is you have to find that number one guy in a draft. You have to find that player that you can build around, and then you have to get a few other really good young pieces around them. Like that's how you be successful. You can't just be stuck in this middle ground, and the Kings just always have been. They keep trying to skip steps, and you fire Mike Brown hoping that just magically fixes everything. And again, I feel like in sports recently, the cool thing to do if you underperform slightly is just to fire your coach immediately and not give any stability to an organization. The organizations that do have stability and that don't try to cut corners are the ones that are successful. And so the Kings do have two options right now. They can rebuild or they can win now. I don't really see how you could take the win now approach. We just have the exit interviews and DeMar. I'm glad he's a big mental health guy, because boy, has his mental health been shredded. He said it was like the toughest season he's ever had. That's what happens when you come to Sacramento. So he's not a guy who's going to want to be here. Sabonis said he wants to be here. He said he loves it here, but he also said he needs to know the direction of the team. Doesn't feel like he wants to be here. Of course, everyone's saying they want to be here, like Levine. Yeah, I want to be here, but also I haven't seen my kids in 5 weeks. Malik's, I'm all in. Okay, that's great. But first of all, you're not going to win with all of those guys together. And second of all, I don't even think mainly DeMar and Sabonis even want to be here. And so I don't see a path forward where you can win now. But I don't doubt that the Kings will probably try to continue to win and try to make some pretty crazy and maybe ill-advised moves to do that. I mean, I think the smarter move is the rebuild approach. And you try to trade pretty much everyone. You try to get as much as you can for Sabonis. I don't know how we're going to trade Levine, but you try to get as much as you can from DeMar. Maybe Monk as well. Although I wouldn't hate Monk just sticking around and trying to put up crazy numbers. But I think you have to go into a rebuild and try to get the top pick. You obviously don't have your pick this season, but next season you do, right? You haven't traded any of your other picks except for the 2031 swap. And so I think you have to commit to a rebuild to try to get that one franchise-changing guy. Vivek has to get out of the way, let Scott Perry do a full rebuild for this team. And next season, you just lean into Keegan Murray as your number one option, or at least as your number two option beside maybe someone who sticks around who you weren't able to trade. And DeMar has already talked about how he wants to work with Keegan this offseason to help him tap into some of his potential that he still has. And I love to hear that. And that's something about DeMar. Like DeMar, the season was a complete disaster, but I've loved having DeRozan here because he's been nothing but a professional, and you can't question his effort to try to get this team to win. And so you have that question of, do you win now or do you rebuild with this roster? The front office question has already been decided, or at least the main guy, the GM, and he'll fill out the rest of the front office from there. And then the last question is the question of the head coach. Right? Is Doug Christie the guy? It seems like by all accounts that he's the favorite because he's so supported by Vivek. And we knew that before we even had a GM. And again, this is like skipping steps again. I mean, Scott Perry was the guy before the season even ended, right? We had this locked and loaded, ready to go. Monte McNair was always going to leave. Scott Perry was going to be the guy to come in. I don't know when it was decided, but it was decided. And that process in it of itself, like, again, Scott Perry seems like a great hire, but the process itself, it's like, did we interview anyone else? Did we even try? It doesn't seem like there was really much of a process there. Again, skipping steps. And then when it comes to the head coach, you have Doug Christie, he's the favorite just because Vivek likes him. I love Doug Christie, but he hasn't necessarily shown anything to give me a reason to believe he should be the coach. He hasn't shown anything that makes me believe he shouldn't either. He was put into a tough situation, but again, it feels like this is one of those scenarios where you need to look at all the options. And I just don't believe the Kings will do that. It feels like they're just going to go with Doug Christie. And maybe that's okay, especially if you lean into a rebuild, because he's a young coach that can grow with a young team. Like, that wouldn't be the worst thing. But again, it just feels like you're skipping steps if they just hire Doug Christie without looking at any of the other options. So hopefully we get big changes in this offseason. And hopefully we get some clarity on the direction of this team, because I mean, I can stand many years of not being a competitive team if it means we can see the path to being a competitive team. What I can't stand is watching a team that's sitting in the middle that has no future, but also isn't very competitive now and is just super frustrating to watch. That's what I can't stand. I want young players that I can believe can grow to be the future of this team. And you do that by rebuilding, by getting top picks in the draft. That's your best shot at doing that. I don't think the Kings are going to get much draft capital when they trade their pieces away, if they trade their pieces away, but you still have to do it because you have your own draft capital, like I said, for the most part. And so you have to take advantage of that. A couple of things before I end this also. I don't think I've gotten a chance to mention the Stockton Kings. They won the G League Finals in Game 3, which was an awesome game because they started off the first half. They were playing absolutely horrendous basketball and were able to come back in that second half. Massive fourth quarter. Mason Jones finally hit a couple of threes after he'd just been missing everything to that point. But then Mason Jones goes down with an injury. I'm thinking, oh no, it's done. Scal steps up, hits a couple threes. Isaac Jones steps up, makes a couple baskets. Dexter Dennis steps up. So shout out to the Stockton Kings. It was cool to see them come out onto the court during the play-in game, get a big standing ovation from the crowd. So at least we got one Kings championship there. And then also shout out to all of you guys for a great season, even if it wasn't the Sacramento Kings season that we wanted. I appreciate all of you for sticking with me. I love the Kings. I love the Kings as the basketball team on the floor and as the community around the Kings. The organization's a dumpster fire, but that's a separate thing. So thank you guys for 1,000 subscribers this season. Make sure if you aren't to subscribe, turn on those notifications. I'll be coming out with kind of my season review probably next week. I'll be talking a lot more about, more specifically, what the Kings will probably look to do this offseason. If there's any other news, I'll be right back here to talk about it. So that is it for this episode of the Roll Report. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.